Chuck was not the kind of man who looked for shadows where there was only light. At 34, he was a pragmatic, level-headed guy who worked in logistics, loved his dog, and trusted his wife of 5 years, Chloe. They had a comfortable life in a quiet suburban neighborhood. If you had asked him that morning how his marriage was doing, he would have smiled and said it was perfectly fine. A little routine, maybe, but solid. That illusion began to crack at a neighborhood dinner party on a humid Saturday night. The party was hosted by their neighbors, but the guest list included a familiar face, Garrett. Garrett was the quintessential family friend. He had gone to college with Chloe, reconnected with them a year ago, and somehow smoothly integrated himself into their social circle. He was always around for Sunday football games or group dinners. Chuck had never minded Garrett. He was just another guy to drink a soda with by the grill. But tonight, something felt off. It wasn't anything dramatic. There were no stolen kisses in the hallway or obvious touching. It was the micro-expressions. Chuck noticed it when he went to the kitchen to grab a fresh bottle of water. He saw Chloe standing by the island, typing rapidly on her phone. Garrett was on the opposite side of the room doing the exact same thing. When Chuck walked in, Chloe immediately locked her screen and placed it face down on the granite counter. Chuck frowned slightly but brushed it off. He pulled out his own phone to check in with a buddy who had skipped the party. Chuck, hey man, are you coming over to the Miller's house? Dave, nah, couldn't make it tonight. Stuck helping my dad with his garage. How's the party? Chuck, pretty standard. Chloe is having fun. I'm just exhausted from the work week, ready to head out soon. Dave, get some rest, man. Catch up next week. By 11:30 p.m., Chuck was genuinely tired. He casually suggested to Chloe that they call an Uber. She agreed a little too quickly. Usually, Chloe loved to linger, chatting at the door for another 20 minutes. Tonight, she already had her purse on her shoulder. They said their goodbyes. Garrett gave Chuck a standard firm handshake and offered Chloe a polite, brief hug. Nothing suspicious. But when they got into the back seat of the Uber, the atmosphere shifted. The car was dark, illuminated only by the passing streetlights. Chuck rested his head against the window, closing his eyes, letting the hum of the tires lull him. He hadn't drank much at all, just one light beer hours ago, but he was deeply fatigued. Beside him, Chloe pulled out her phone. Chuck opened his eyes just a fraction. He didn't mean to snoop. But the brightness of her screen reflected against the dark interior of the car, and from his angle, leaning against the door, he had a clear, unobstructed view of her chat window. His stomach plummeted as if he had just stepped off a ledge. The name at the top of the chat was Garrett. Chloe. We are in the Uber now. He had way too much to drink tonight. He's barely keeping his eyes open. Garrett. Perfect timing. Leave the back patio door unlocked for me. Chloe. I will. He'll be completely out by the time we get inside. See you in a bit. Garrett. Can't wait. I'll give it 20 minutes so you can settle him down. Chuck stopped breathing. The hum of the Uber faded into a dull ringing in his ears. For a few agonizing seconds, his brain completely refused to process the words he had just read. He had way too much to drink. She was lying to Garrett about Chuck's state to justify a timeline. Leave the back patio door unlocked. A cold, heavy wave of depression washed over him. His chest tightened painfully. 5 years of marriage, of building a life together, of planning for a family, shattered in the span of 3 text messages. His first instinct was to sit up, snatch the phone from her hands, and demand answers. He wanted to yell. He wanted to stop the car and walk home alone in the dark. But Chuck was a man of logistics. He solved problems by analyzing the board, not by flipping the table. If he confronted her now, she would deny it. She would claim it was a joke, a misunderstanding, or she would delete the texts and call him crazy. Garrett would never show up, and Chuck would be left with a fractured marriage and no concrete proof. He needed to know the full extent of this betrayal. He needed to see it for himself, no matter how much it was going to destroy him. So, Chuck made a choice. He relaxed his posture. He let his jaw go slack, tilted his head back, and let out a soft, rhythmic snore. Chuck, Chloe whispered in the dark of the back seat. He didn't respond. He just shifted heavily, leaning slightly toward her, playing the part of a man completely checked out from the world. When the Uber pulled into their driveway, Chloe had to gently shake his shoulder. Chuck put on the performance of a lifetime. He groaned, rubbing his face clumsily, and stumbled as he got out of the car. He leaned heavily on the front door frame as Chloe fumbled with her keys to let them in. "Come on, let's get you to bed," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made Chuck want to be sick. Fine," Chuck slurred, purposefully leaving his shoes on. He walked a few heavy steps into the living room and collapsed onto the large leather sofa. He buried his face into the cushions, threw one arm over his head, and began to breathe deeply and evenly. He heard Chloe sigh. She stood over him for a moment. He could feel her eyes on him. "Chuck, wake up! Go upstairs," she urged, poking his arm. He muttered something completely unintelligible and rolled over, facing the back of the sofa. Satisfied, Chloe walked away. Chuck heard her footsteps head toward the kitchen. He heard the distinct, soft beep of the home security panel being pocket. He pulled his phone out, keeping it under the blanket, turning the screen brightness down to 0. His hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline and the heartbreak, but he managed to type a quick message to his older brother. "Chuck, hey, you awake?" Liam, "Yeah, watching a movie. What's up?" Chuck, "If I need a place to crash tomorrow, can I come over? Please don't ask any questions right now." Liam, "Yeah, of course. Couch is yours. Everything okay?" Chuck, "I'll explain later. Thanks." Chuck slipped the phone back into his pocket. He closed his eyes, kept his breathing steady, and waited in the dark. The trap was set, but it wasn't for him. For 20 agonizing minutes, Chuck lay on the leather sofa, perfectly still. The house was completely silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the steady ticking of the wall clock in the hallway. Every second felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, maintaining the slow, heavy breathing of a man lost to a deep sleep, but beneath his calm exterior, his mind was racing. He tried to process the reality of his situation. He and Chloe had bought this house 3 years ago. They had painted the walls together. They had picked out the very sofa he was currently pretending to be unconscious on. And now she was waiting in the dark for another man to walk through their back door. The betrayal was so profound it made him feel physically ill, but a cold, hard knot of resolve was forming in his stomach. He was not going to be the victim who found out months later. He was going to take control. Finally, he heard it. The faintest click of the patio door handle turning. The sound was followed by the soft whisper of weather-stripping brushing against the floorboards. Someone had stepped inside. Chuck didn't flinch. He didn't alter his breathing. He just listened. Soft, deliberate footsteps moved from the kitchen linoleum to the hardwood of the dining room, creeping closer to the living room archway. "Hey!" a masculine voice whispered. It was Garrett, the familiar tone, the same voice that had casually asked Chuck to pass the mustard at a barbecue last month, now sent a jolt of pure disgust through Chuck's veins. "Shh!" Chloe's voice floated back, barely audible. "Over here." There was a pause. Chuck could feel them standing near the archway, looking at him in the dark. He let out a low, muffled groan, shifted his weight slightly on the cushions, and let his arm drop limply toward the floor. "Is he out?" Garrett asked, his voice dropping an octave, laced with a smug confidence that made Chuck's jaw clench. "Completely," Chloe replied softly. "I told you, he drank way too much. He won't wake up until tomorrow morning. Come on." Their footsteps retreated. Chuck listened as they moved toward the staircase. He heard the faint rustle of clothing, a suppressed giggle from his wife, and the muffled thud of footsteps ascending the carpeted stairs to the second floor. Then, the heavy oak door of the master bedroom clicked shut. The house fell silent again. Chuck opened his eyes. The living room was bathed in the pale, blue light of the moon filtering through the blinds. He slowly sat up, his joints stiff from holding the awkward position. He reached down and silently untied his shoes, slipping them off his feet to ensure his footsteps would be completely muffled. He stood up in his socks. Before moving, he pulled out his phone. He needed to make sure he had a lifeline for tomorrow. "Chuck, Liam, you still up?" Liam, "Yeah, pacing my living room. You're scaring me, man. What is going on?" Chuck, "I'm safe, but I'm going to need your help tomorrow. Things are over between me and Chloe. I caught her." Liam, "Say the word, and I'm coming over right now. I'll bring my truck." Chuck, "No. Stay there. I have to handle this my way tonight. I'll call you when the sun comes up. Chuck put the phone on silent and slid it into his front pocket. It was time to move. He walked to the base of the stairs. As a homeowner, Chuck knew the anatomy of his house better than anyone. He knew that the third step from the bottom creaked loudly on the left side, right where the wood had warped last winter. He knew the seventh step had a loose nail. He bypassed the left side entirely, placing his weight gently on the extreme right edge of the steps, gliding upward like a ghost in his own home. When he reached the second-floor landing, his eyes adjusted to the darkness. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall. A thin strip of warm, yellow light bled from underneath the door. As he crept closer, he saw exactly what he had hoped for. Garrett and Chloe had been in such a reckless, eager rush that they hadn't even made it fully into the room before shedding their layers. Lying in a careless heap right outside the bedroom door was Garrett's clothing. A pair of expensive leather loafers were kicked against the baseboard. Next to them lay a wrinkled button-down shirt and a pair of dark denim jeans. Chuck knelt down on the carpet. His hands were remarkably steady. He didn't look at the door. He didn't try to listen to the muffled sounds coming from within. He completely detached his emotions from his actions, operating purely on logic. He picked up the jeans and reached into the front right pocket. Empty. He checked the left. His fingers brushed against cold metal. He pulled out a heavy key fob. The shiny BMW logo caught the dim light from the hallway. Garrett's pride and joy was parked just down the street. Chuck slipped the keys into his own pocket. Next, he scooped up Garrett's jeans, the shirt, and the expensive loafers, gathering them tightly against his chest. He stood up and took one last look at the closed bedroom door. A profound sense of finality washed over him. He turned his back on his marriage and walked silently down the stairs. He dropped Garrett's clothes in a neat pile by the front entrance and walked into the kitchen. Just as he had suspected, Chloe's smartphone was resting on the kitchen island, plugged into the charger. She always left it there overnight. He stepped toward it. The screen was dark, but he knew her passcode. He unplugged the device and tapped the screen to ensure it was working. A notification was waiting on the lock screen. Susan, Mom. Did you guys have a good time at the dinner party? Your dad says hi. Chloe, earlier. Yes, just getting home now. So tired. Talk tomorrow. Love you. Chuck stared at the screen, shaking his head at the sheer normalcy of her deception. He pocketed her phone, placing it next to Garrett's car keys. He now had everything he needed. He looked around the quiet, dark kitchen. He was standing in the center of his home, holding the keys to his rival's car and his wife's only connection to the outside world. The first phase was complete. Now it was time to lock the trap. Chuck stepped out onto the front porch, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him with a soft, controlled click. The cool night air hit his face, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the house. In his arms, he held Garrett's jeans, shirt, and loafers. In his pockets were the BMW key fob and Chloe's smartphone. He walked quietly down the driveway to his own sedan, popped the trunk, and tossed Garrett's clothes inside. He slammed it shut. There would be no quick dressing and running away for the family friend. Next, Chuck pressed the unlock button on Garrett's key fob. About half a block down the street, the headlights of a sleek, dark gray BMW flashed twice. Chuck walked over to it, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car purred quietly. He shifted into drive and slowly rolled down the street, turning the wheel sharply as he approached his own property. He parked the BMW horizontally straight across the base of his driveway, effectively blocking the exit. He turned off the engine, stepped out, and locked the doors, pocketing the key fob once more. Garrett was officially grounded. Now came the most crucial part of the plan. Chuck stood on the sidewalk looking up at the dark, silent facade of his home. He pulled out his own smartphone and opened the centralized smart home application that controlled their security system, thermostat, and locks. He tapped on the front door icon. The screen displayed the current status, locked. Chuck navigated to the advanced settings and selected a feature they had only used once during a 2-week trip to Europe, vacation mode. He pressed Enable. A loading circle spun for 2 seconds before a green checkmark appeared. The trap was sprung. Vacation mode was designed to prevent burglars from breaking a nearby window, reaching inside, and simply turning the thumb latch to open the door. When activated, the electronic deadbolt physically disengaged the interior thumb turn. The door could only be unlocked via the Master Administrator app on Chuck's phone, or with a physical emergency override key, which was currently sitting on Chuck's keychain in his pocket. If Garrett and Chloe tried to leave through the front door, they would find the lock completely frozen. Chuck mentally reviewed the perimeter. If they panicked and tried to flee through the back patio door, which Chloe had left unlocked for Garrett, they would step out into the backyard. But the backyard was surrounded by a 6-foot-tall wooden privacy fence, and Chuck had padlocked the side gate shut before winter began. If they went out the back, they would just be standing barefoot in the damp grass, completely naked, with absolutely nowhere to go. It was a perfect, inescapable box. Chuck walked over to his own car, parked safely on the street, and got into the driver's seat. The silence of the night was deafening. The adrenaline that had carried him through the house was beginning to wear off, replaced by a profound, hollow ache in his chest. His marriage was over. Tomorrow, he would have to call lawyers, separate bank accounts, and explain to his friends why his life had imploded. A wave of depression threatened to pull him under, but he gripped the steering wheel tight, forcing himself to stay focused. He could grieve tomorrow. Tonight, he had to finish this. He pulled out Chloe's phone. It was time for the final act. He opened her messages and scrolled down to the group chat with her parents, Susan and Arthur. They were deeply conservative, traditional people who lived just 10 minutes away in a neighboring subdivision. They adored Chuck and held their daughter to incredibly high standards. Taking a deep breath, Chuck began to type, mimicking Chloe's texting style. Chloe's phone. Mom and Dad. Mom, Dad, please come over right now. It's an emergency. Please hurry. Chloe's phone. Mom and Dad. Use the front door. The keypad code is acting up and I can't get it open. Just come inside quickly. He stared at the screen, watching the little delivery receipt pop up. Less than a minute later, 3 gray dots appeared, indicating someone was typing. Mom and Dad to Chloe's phone. Arthur is grabbing his coat. We are on our way right now. Is Chuck okay? Honey, what is going on? Chloe's phone to Mom and Dad. Just hurry, please. Chuck locked her phone and set it down on the passenger seat. He leaned his head back against the headrest. The stage was set. He pulled out his own phone to give his brother one last update. Chuck, the trap is set. Everything is locked down. Liam. Trap? Chuck, what exactly did you do? You're scaring me, man. Do not do anything crazy. Chuck, I haven't laid a finger on anyone. I just rearranged the furniture, so to speak. I'm sitting in my car outside. Her parents are on the way. Liam, her parents? Oh my God, you are a madman. Call me the second this is over. Chuck, I will. Keep your phone loud. Chuck lowered his window a few inches to let the cool breeze in. He crossed his arms over his chest and kept his eyes fixed on the road leading into the neighborhood. He didn't have to wait long. 7 minutes later, a silver SUV turned the corner, speeding slightly over the residential limit. It slowed abruptly as it approached Chuck's house, the headlights illuminating the BMW parked awkwardly across the driveway. Arthur and Susan had arrived. The final act was about to begin. The cool night air washed over Chuck as he sat in his car, watching the silver SUV idle awkwardly in the street. Arthur and Susan stepped out, their faces illuminated by the harsh glare of the streetlights. They were in their pajamas, hastily covered by heavy winter coats. Arthur looked deeply alarmed, his eyes scanning the property, while Susan clutched her purse with trembling hands. Before they could panic further, Chuck opened his car door and stepped out into the street. Chuck, they just pulled up. It's happening. Liam, stay calm. Do not yell. Let them see it for themselves. I am so sorry you have to go through this. Chuck, I have nothing left to say to her anyway. See you soon. Chuck slipped the phone into his pocket and walked toward his in-laws. The crushing weight of the depression he had felt in the Uber was still there, sitting heavy in his chest, but it was now wrapped in a cold, impenetrable layer of resolve. Chuck! Susan gasped, hurrying across the damp grass. Oh, thank goodness you're outside. Chloe texted us. She said there was an emergency, that she couldn't get the door open. Is someone inside the house? Did you call the police? Arthur walked up beside his wife, his posture rigid. He looked at the dark gray BMW parked horizontally across the driveway, completely blocking the garage. Whose car is that? Chuck, what is going on here? Where is my daughter? Chuck looked at the two of them. They were good people. They had welcomed him into their family 5 years ago with open arms. It broke his heart to know that he was about to shatter their world, but they needed to know the truth about who their daughter really was. Arthur, Susan, I am so sorry to drag you out of bed at this hour, Chuck said, his voice terrifyingly calm and steady. There is no intruder. No one broke in. Then why did she text us? Arthur demanded, his confusion morphing into frustration. Please, just follow me, Chuck replied softly. He led them up the concrete walkway to the front porch. The house was completely silent. Chuck pulled out his smartphone, opened his security application, and disabled the vacation mode. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed from inside the heavy oak door as the deadbolt finally disengaged. He pushed the door open. The dark entryway greeted them. Chuck stepped aside, gesturing for Arthur and Susan to enter first. Chuck, you are scaring me, Susan whispered, clutching Arthur's arm as they stepped into the foyer. The problem is on the second floor, in the master bedroom, Chuck said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He stayed firmly on the doormat, refusing to cross the threshold. I won't be going back up there. You need to see this for yourselves. Arthur frowned deeply, a mix of parental protectiveness and deep apprehension crossing his face. Without another word, he guided Susan toward the staircase. Chuck stood on the porch, staring out into the quiet street, listening. He heard the heavy thud of Arthur's boots on the stairs. He heard the distinct creak of the third step. He heard them reach the second-floor landing. Then there was the sound of a door handle turning, followed by the hinges swinging open. For 3 excruciating seconds, there was absolute, dead silence. Then Arthur's voice boomed through the house, shaking the very walls. What in the name of God is the meaning of this? Susan let out a sharp, horrified gasp that echoed down the staircase. Chloe, oh my God, what are you doing? Chaos erupted upstairs. The illusion of the perfect marriage was completely eradicated. From the porch, Chuck could perfectly picture the scene unfolding in his bedroom. He knew exactly what Arthur and Susan were looking at. When Arthur had thrown the door open, the sudden noise had sent the 2 traitors into a blind panic. Mom! Dad! Close the door! Please! Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated shame. Chuck could hear the frantic rustling of the bedsheets as she desperately tried to cover herself. And then there was Garrett. Sir, please, this is a misunderstanding. Garrett stammered, his voice trembling like a frightened child. In his frantic rush to find clothes that Chuck had already stolen, Garrett had grabbed the only thing hanging on the back of the bedroom door. It was Chuck's favorite, heavy, dark blue plush bathrobe, the one Chloe had bought for him 2 years ago for his birthday, the one with the name Chuck, proudly embroidered in bright gold lettering across the left chest. Garrett was standing in the middle of the room, frantically tying the belt of the husband's personalized robe around his waist, looking utterly pathetic. A misunderstanding? Arthur roared, his voice laced with venom. You are standing in my son-in-law's bedroom, wearing his personal clothing. Get out! Get your clothes and get out of this house before I throw you out the window. I can't find them, Garrett panicked, his voice echoing down the hall. My jeans. They were right here by the door. My car keys. Mom, please, you have to listen to me, Chloe sobbed, the reality of her ruined life finally crashing down on her. Do not speak to me, Susan cried out, her voice breaking with devastation. How could you do this to Chuck? How could you bring this man into your home? Heavy footsteps marched back toward the stairs. Arthur descended first. The older man looked as though he had aged 10 years in the span of 3 minutes. His face was pale, his jaw set in pure rage. Susan followed closely behind him, wiping tears from her face, refusing to look back up the stairs. Chloe appeared at the top of the landing. She was wrapped tightly in the white floral bedsheet, her makeup smeared across her face. She looked down at Chuck, who was still standing calmly by the open front door. Chuck, she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. Please. Right behind her, Garrett peeked over her shoulder, clutching the collar of the Chuck-embroidered robe tight against his neck. He looked terrified. Hey, man, where is my stuff? You blocked my car. Chuck didn't yell. He didn't curse at them. He just looked at his wife with a cold, hollow stare. I will have my lawyer contact you on Monday morning, Chuck said evenly, his voice carrying clearly up the stairs. You can stay here tonight, Chloe. The house is completely secure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her smartphone, tossing it casually onto the entryway table. Then, he held up Garrett's BMW key fob. The silver metal caught the porch light. "Your car is blocking the driveway, Garrett," Chuck said, looking the man dead in the eye. "Your clothes and your shoes are locked in the trunk of my car. I'll be taking those with me. You can walk home. It's a nice, cool night for it." Garrett's eyes widened in horror as the sheer genius of the trap finally dawned on him. He was trapped in a house with furious parents wearing the husband's robe, with no phone, no clothes, and a useless car. Chuck didn't wait for a response. He turned his back on them, stepped off the porch, and walked toward his car, parked on the street. He didn't look back as Arthur slammed the front door shut, trapping the miserable pair inside to face the consequences of their actions. Chuck got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out his phone one last time. "Chuck, it's done. The house is a war zone. I'm on my way." "Liam, I have the guest room ready. I ordered a pizza. I'm proud of you, man. Drive safe." Chuck put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. He was leaving his home, his marriage, and his old life behind. It was going to be a long, difficult road to heal, but as he drove into the quiet night, a small, genuine smile finally broke across his face. He had won. The fallout was swift and absolute. The next morning, Garrett suffered the ultimate humiliation. With his phone and keys gone, he had to use Chloe's landline to call a towing company, standing in the driveway shivering in Chuck's monogrammed bathrobe while the neighbors watched from their windows. His reputation in their social circle evaporated overnight. He was entirely ostracized and eventually moved to a different city to escape the constant whispers. Chloe fared no better. Her conservative parents were so deeply ashamed of her actions that they temporarily cut off contact, leaving her completely isolated. When the divorce proceedings began, Chloe didn't dare fight Chuck in mediation. Between the security system logs, the saved text messages, and her own parents as star witnesses to her infidelity, Chuck held all the cards. He kept his assets and sold the house a month later, washing his hands of the memories entirely. A year later, Chuck sat on the back deck of his new townhouse, peacefully tossing a tennis ball to his dog. He had kept his dignity and his sanity. He proved that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's simply locking the door, walking away, and letting the guilty destroy themselves.
Wow, what a ride. Chuck perfectly proved that silence and strategy hit way harder than screaming. I personally love how he didn't just walk away. He completely dismantled their lies, using his own smart home and that monogrammed bathrobe. It's an absolute masterclass in staying calm under pressure. Sometimes, letting the trash take itself out is the ultimate victory. But what do you guys think? Was Chuck's calculated trap perfectly justified? Or would you have confronted them immediately in the car? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments.